Hello once again, everyone. So today I'm going to be going over kind of the PowerPoints, as it were. But what I mean by that is specifically in my open classes, as well as a couple privates here and there, we've been talking about moving through aggressive guards, as well as defensive guards, etc., but without getting into the specifics of them. So you will not hear me talking about, Vampag or about Postidona and the plays that flow out of them. Instead, these are all focused around one thing: getting you a good opening downward cut, be that an Oberhau or a Fendenti, something that is just long edge cut. Now you could use the same concept for other techniques, but for right now we're just focusing on, as I used an analogy, the capital letter, right? So if I want to make a sentence, I'm going to first write out my big capital letter to get your attention, have you follow along with it, and then I use the period as the withdrawal. So what I mean by this is, we have a lot of specialty sort of strikes, and oftentimes one that is ignored is going to be your basic downwards cut, arguably humanity's first cut. And I think this is amiss, because frankly, there's a lot of great stuff that can come out of these actions, and so I wanted to go into how I in particular like firing them, as well as some differences in regards to what is a powerful position to move into. So for those of you that are already in the school, you may have heard about these things. These are going to be, like I said, your positions of power that you take to either enter or to hold your ground. For those of you that are new, I'll kind of briefly go over it. So every guard really falls into three categories pretty much. You've got point forward of its various different kinds, various different extensions, right? Various different foot placement. You've got point low, right, of its various different kinds, etc. And then you have loaded or powerful positions, again of its various different kinds, but in general you're looking for, within them, especially in the powerful, something that sets you up for your dominant side's strongest opening cut. Because, as we are given advice multiple times, we do not want to be cutting out of our offside as our initial action. We want to be driving them, even if we're not going to hit with this, we want to be driving them over to open up our next opportunity, and also this is just the better way to enter. So, with that in mind, let's go over the three kind of main positions that I like for this. So, our first and our smallest is going to be when you go at the shoulder. Now this is a position that I don't like to stand in. None of these are actually ones you should stand in for long periods of time. These are ones that I move into to take a purpose and then execute my technique. I don't want to be hovering here for long periods of time, and same with the other two as well, with some slight exception. So this is going to get you a very tight downwards cut and is best applied into the middle. I also like to target these cuts in particular into the neck, down into the center of the body, as that's where I'm going to be aiming. Not that these cuts couldn't be directed higher, but with this held at my shoulder, what this really allows me to do is apply a lot of energy in the middle game. So we've got kind of three heights, right? Up high, in the middle, and then low. We're not ever really going to target low, but we will sometimes target higher. The middle game, though, is meant to be going either through whatever counteraction you're throwing or through whatever guard you've already taken. I'm trying to wedge where your sword is going to be out of the way, whether or not it's actually there. So, at the shoulder, I want to be leading with nice, good extension, right? Nice, good push, using both of my arms, right? And my step is going to be relatively small here. Now, it's not to say that you couldn't do bigger steps with this, but in general, you're going to get diminishing returns as you go. The bigger the step I take, yes, the more reach I get, but the more disconnected from my back leg I will become. And since I'm trying to really focus on this middle game and really cutting through with this, I don't need that sort of extension. So this will usually be one solid passing step. So, at the shoulder, again, 30 degrees on all of these cuts. I'm trying to get into the neck. So, I load myself up, I bring forward, straight through. Do that again. And I like to, as an exercise, I like to start low and move into these, as opposed to beginning at the guard. So, up and loaded, through. You'll notice it still reaches decently far, but it's not my longest reaching cut, because I'm just trying to focus on using that tight load that I just made. Now, this, like I said, I use it mostly for working in against that wedge, or sometimes for taking extremities. So if someone has their arms extended or something along those lines, this is a great cut to use. as it will enter into strong binds, it will cause them to retract, and it doesn't really cost me anything. I can very easily turn this into a second cut, or a retreat, or a bunch of things. So that's kind of our first baseline level, is loaded at the shoulder, through, right, with a smallish step. Now, our next powerful position is going to be moving up. So now I'm going up into, for those of you that have seen Hold vom Tag, though this could also be its normal, high version of any guard, really. Basically, for this, when I cut, my objective is still its same 30-degree cut. I now tend to move my targeting up to be going into the temple and then into the teeth. I want this to be something that forces someone to have to parry, but it's more about getting them to go from low to high, or just to, come out and meet me, as opposed to worrying about particular openings. We'll get there again in a minute. Basically, this is the kind of Donnerschlag, right? The thunder strike, the serious power behind it. I want this to be my strongest overhand cut, so I'm moving into my strongest position and executing my cut from there. Now, once again, this whole sort of idea behind this is I'm bringing up kind of to the crown of my head, keep my elbows in and loading this. Now this step will be a little more extended, as I am aiming for higher on the body. I'm going to now kind of push off of my foot as I step. So rather than just stepping, I am now getting a little bit of push, but not a huge amount. I'm not springing quite yet. As the idea behind this is I want to be finishing, if I meet any force, in kind of the same position that I've got with here, just now it's got a little bit more oomph behind it, pretty much. So, here's that again. I load, cut. 30 degrees through the eye into the teeth. One more time. Load, cut. Now, our next position that we're going to be moving into, this one's going to start we basically started with not worrying about anything other than the central and a relatively small step. We then moved into the middle ground, and now we're moving up into its opposite, that being a lot more worried about the external game and more specific in its openings. So there are 5 basic main openings, right? Upper right, upper left, lower right, lower left, and then the central game, right, of various qualities depending upon where it's coming from. With this powerful position, i.e. it looks basically like Fenestra or like Ox on my right side, when we talk about cuts from this, we get a different kind of mechanic. So the added benefit of having my tip forward is that I can allow the tip to drop and use that lever cutting mechanic to really pull this over. The benefit of this is that this can lead to a very, very powerful and extended cut without really needing a whole lot of my hip behind it, which is why oftentimes you'll see these kinds of cuts being secondary actions, etc. I've gotten out here and then I'm using my wrists in place of big steps because I am in distance, depending upon what you're reading at least. Now, because I don't need as big of a step, I can afford to take, let me amend that. Because I don't need my hips for my power on this, I can take a bigger step, which is also good because this is a bigger overall cut. So this one, when I execute it, I can reach a lot further, and the idea behind using this sort of powerful cut is I'm trying to get all of your attention to go right up to your upper left opening, preferably. And I can, of course, direct this cut to other places, but this is meant to be getting you to really dedicate over to a side, preferably. If the first 2 were about wedging in the middle and dealing with stuff in the middle, second one was about getting you to go up, but still not necessarily extended. This one is about trying to get you to go to one side or the other in your defenses. Now, because I'm looking to do that, I am going to let this cut be relatively extended, still a 30 degrees, but a lot more spring in my step, so to speak. And this one I like to extend almost past my target. Now, I'm obviously not cutting fully past the target, but I'm going right about for here, kind of if you feel the curvature of your skull, you've got kind of that corner right there. Right next to that is where I like to aim, and slightly past it. So that way, really, when this cut comes in, you focus in on that tip and go, oh no, and kind of curl in on yourself. So here's it from the front. I've got nice extended position, so this one also, let's talk about moving into it. So with the others, I loaded my position, right? Little bit of kind of pressure onto my left leg, but I'm not leaning onto it. This one in particular, I like to do with a much more extended advance, as I am essentially dropping and I'm about to step off of it. That's my personal preference. Again, you can do all these with different footwork, but that's the way I like to do it. So I do an advance and I let my tip go out. I let it start dropping, and then I pull with my pommel as I extend out. And you can notice I'm even though I'm not trying to get offline movement, it blends very well with this and gets kind of everything centered up over there. Here's it again. So move up, out. Now this one as well doesn't tend to go all the way through, nor really should it, because I'm trying to focus on driving to such a high target. So I'm usually going to end up here, but can absolutely still cut all the way through. Just going to be a relatively small cut, proportionately. So let's talk about that as well. As I go for more extension, the cut itself is smaller, as it were. So at the shoulder, my cut is about from here to here. All of that, I wish I had a graphic so I could like highlight that, but from here to there, it is good. It is a strong cut with all my body behind it. From up here, that same sort of thing applies. About there to there is where it's all strong cut. It's gotten a little smaller because it's gone a little bit higher. With this one, it's from about here to there. Very small proportionately compared to the others, but that's because as it's going higher, its kind of sweet spot is landing more and more extended as it gets further and further away from my body. Now, that's not to say that you couldn't use tighter movement and in theory still get the same thing you'd get here, but you don't need to, because you could just go out the shoulder. So, what do you do with these powerful positions? How should you think about it, at least in my opinion? I like to move into them depending upon what I'm looking to achieve and try to avoid standing in the ones that I don't want to use in that moment. As in theory, all of them can be applied with different footwork. I could make a bigger stepping at the shoulder. I could make a smaller stepping from the tip forward, but they are optimized to one side versus the other. So basically, as you're moving around and before you enter into your powerful position, consider what level of game you're looking to playing and also what target you're going for. Is the person very centralized or are they going to play centralized? I'm probably better off going into this at the shoulder so I can get power into that wedge. Is this someone that I can drive upward and get them into more of a defensive parry, but not necessarily someone that I'm looking to drive specifically over? Okay, this is something that I'm going to move up so I get a lot of entry power into that. And that's very good for your binds and winds, by the way. Or is this someone that I'm trying to specifically get them to dedicate to one side or the other or things along those lines, either because they're susceptible to it or I am apt to it. You know, maybe I'm a very particular kind of combo fighter and I like to do that, which sometimes I do. Then I'll go ahead and get you focused on that upper side so my follow-up can be somewhere else. And I find when you use these mechanics, then different kinds of plays flow more naturally out of them. So for example, you can also use this at the shoulder in your parries or in your wedges, right? And then work from there. Alternatively, like I said here, this guy enters into binds very, very easily because you get all that downward power into when the swords meet, but you're a little bit more extended, so it's easier then to turn over or work from there. My more extended sort of cuts, these are great for my combinations because I'm already in Langnord, essentially long point, posta longa, right? Just cover all my bases. I'm ready to move on to my next thing. So this is kind of what I like to do with these and when I like to employ them. And of course they can be employed defensively as well to a respect, but I'll save that for later. So now, how can you practice this efficiently apart from hitting people? Well, you can do that little drill that I was just talking about. This is great to do on a dummy like Bob, or just a post with different levels on it. I like to target one about neck level, one about eye level, and then one to the side of the top of the head. And all you do is you start a little out of distance, and you move in, cut, then you reset. You move in, cut, then you reset. You move in, cut, and then you reset. And just practice that, play around with the different distances you can get, play around with melding different mechanics with each other. That's a really good one for it. Alternatively, another thing that you can do to practice this is start using cutting patterns you already know and start thinking about when you want to employ these certain powerful positions, either because the cutting pattern already calls for it, or alternatively because you are experimenting with things. So first, let's look at a cutting pattern that is, you can literally do anything with it. It's good old Meyer, right? So Meyer can be done with those 3 different mechanics. It'll look quite different. So here's me doing that all at the shoulder. And that same idea, I'm not going to cut out of the shoulder every time, but I'm going to use the same mentality of tightly loaded to me, playing middle game. So just the first pattern, down, up, down. Down, up, down. Very tight, very centralized focus. Now I'm going to use from the crown. Down, up, down. A little bit more extended, but very focused on trying to get that extra pressure in the middle. And then here is now with my extension. Down, up, down. Much more lateral when I use it, as I'm trying to focus on getting you to look at the opening that I'm looking at and trying to drive you toward it. And you may find different results in yourself, but when I use this mentality, that's what I find I get out of it, and that's the same pattern, right? You can also meld them. Maybe all of your cuts out of your right are meant to be centralized. Maybe you like to vary it up toward the end of the pattern. A bunch of different things you can do. But now let's look at a different pattern. Let's go ahead and use the Culinary cutting pattern. Old one from the channel, right? So that one basically boils down to goofy step, schilt, schilt, Mittelhau, Oberhau, Wechselhau. Now, let's look at what kind of cuts, what kind of loading positions we're moving through as we do that. The initial goofy step could be from here or from the shoulder. Personally, I feel it finds a little better at the shoulder because I'm looking to wedge. As for the schilt, that one's basically playing up here. Not a whole lot to talk about there because it's a different kind of cut, but same sort of idea. With my mittels, that's definitely extension. I am looking to get you looking over to where that tip is going as much as possible and using my movement to compensate for such. After I load after that second mittel, this is very much about getting power into the central line. So I'm loading up to the crown and bringing through without movement because the pattern asks for it. But I want to enter into something strong with as much gravity on my side as possible. I then rip back up with the same idea and get 2 cuts basically to mirror the first 2. I find that if you use this kind of approach, at least for your power shots, you can make a certain new level of deepness for some patterns you may already be familiar with. And I find this also to be relatively universal. In this case, I use 2 German examples, but you can play around with pretty much any cutting pattern and just look at where am I loading and what is my objective. Not to say, of course, that you can't drive with here. Not to say, of course, that you can't extend from here. Just that these things lend to them very naturally, and I find it is a very good way to approach your powerful openers, or your capital letters, as I like to think of them. But otherwise, I hope that's helpful for you guys. Thank you very, very much for watching, and we will be going over some other techniques another time.